So the internet is full of people claiming that they live in Cambodia for just $500 a month. And yet, somehow they're all filming it from a swimming pool. So apparently they're living on $500 a month while simultaneously living on a lifestyle that looks suspiciously similar to a luxury lifestyle. But what's the truth? Can you actually live in Cambodia for just $500 a month in 2026? Or is this just another expat myth, right up there with I'll only stay a few weeks, and I definitely won't end up buying another scooter? So today I'm breaking down exactly what $500 gets you here in Cambodia, where the money goes, what sacrifices you'll need to make, because there'll be a few, and whether this budget is still realistic, or if inflation has finally come for the kingdom. Because while Cambodia is still one of the cheapest places to live in Southeast Asia, living on $500 a month might mean the difference between being a comfortable minimalist and having a very close relationship with instant noodles. So let's find out. With the first section, finding a place to live, because the biggest expense in your budget will be rent. But Cambodia is one of the few places where $500 a month still gives you a fighting chance. So in more rural places, and cities even like Siem Reap, it's still possible to find simple studios or one-bedroom apartments for around $150 to $250 a month. And they won't be luxury condos with rooftop infinity pools, but they'll usually come with the essentials: a bed, air conditioning, which you will have to be careful with using, Wi-Fi, and enough furniture to convince visitors that you're a functioning adult. The trick is managing your expectations. If you're imagining a modern apartment in the centre of town with a gym, swimming pool, and floor-to-ceiling windows, then your budget is about to experience a serious reality check. The $500 lifestyle works best when you're happy living outside the most popular areas and accepting that your apartment may have a few quirks. Maybe the shower is right next to the toilet, maybe the walls are thinner than a spring roll wrapper, or maybe a gecko has been living there longer than you have. But compared to housing costs in many Western countries, it's still remarkable value. For a relatively small amount of money, you can have your own place, air conditioning during Cambodia's famously hot weather, and enough cash left over for food and everyday life. But not too many luxuries, I'm afraid. And I'll get into that in one of the later sections. But the housing costs here are one of the main reasons the legendary $500 Cambodia budget still remains barely possible in the first place. Now on to eating like a local. Because if the $500 a month lifestyle has a secret weapon, it's Cambodian food. Because if you eat like a local, then your budget will suddenly start looking a lot healthier. A typical breakfast of pork and rice, noodle soup, or a fresh baguette can cost just a couple dollars. While many local lunch and dinner options are cheaper than a fancy coffee back home, the hardest part isn't finding affordable food. It's resisting the temptation to order delivery every day, just because it is so cheap, and they seem to always have deals on, at least on the Grab app anyway. But of course, the key phrase here is eating like a local. If every meal needs to be a Western burger, imported steak, or avocado toast served on reclaimed driftwood, your budget is going to wave a white flag straight away. Because when it comes to your budget, Cambodia rewards people who embrace local food and punishes people who are trying to recreate their home country, one expensive grocery item at a time. The funny thing is that many expats arrive planning to cook every meal to save money, only to discover that eating out is often just as affordable. And before long they find themselves becoming regulars at the same food stalls, greeted by name and ordering the same meal every day. It's one of the few places in the world where being too lazy to cook can actually make financial sense. But remember, you will have to say goodbye to Western meals and foods in order to stick within this type of budget, because only then will you be able to feed yourself for anywhere between $100 to $150 a month, if you eat like a local pretty much every day. Now on to transportation costs. And transportation in general in Cambodia can be surprisingly budget friendly. If you're living in a city like Siem Reap, you might not even need a car at all. And that's a good thing, because there's no chance you're going to be able to afford one on this kind of budget. I mean, many people get around using bicycle or scooter, or the occasional tuk-tuk ride. And it's entirely possible to keep your monthly transportation costs under $50. Compared to countries where owning a car feels mandatory, that's a huge win for anyone trying to stick to a $500 budget. Of course, riding a scooter in Cambodia adds onto the budget, so walking is going to be your main mode of transport, since it's free. But if you do have any spare money after your first month here, on this very limited budget, maybe you can actually rent a cheap scooter. Just maybe. Because the good news is that fuel is relatively affordable, distances that you're travelling are often short, and ride-hailing apps make it easier to get around when you don't feel like driving. In fact, many expats find that transportation becomes one of the smallest expenses in their monthly budget. The biggest challenge isn't paying for transport, It's more explaining to your friends back home how 6 people can fit on a singular scooter and somehow make it look perfectly normal. Now on to utilities and internet. Utilities is one of those expenses that may look small on paper, but that's until Cambodia's hot season arrives. I mean, water is usually inexpensive and internet is surprisingly affordable, but electricity is where things can get interesting. If you're trying to live on $500 a month, you'll quickly discover that the air conditioner is both your best friend and your greatest financial enemy. Every time you switch it on, you can almost hear your budget quietly screaming in the background. So you will have to accept the fact that you'll be using fans for most of the time, and maybe on very hot days using the air conditioning to cool the room down a little, but then turning it back off as soon as it's done just that. Because if you use the AC all the time, there's an even slimmer chance you'll be able to stretch this already minimal budget out for the entire month. But the good news is that internet service is generally reliable and fast enough for streaming, remote work, and spending far too much time watching YouTube videos about living in Cambodia. In fact, many newcomers are pleasantly surprised by how good the internet actually is. The real challenge isn't getting online, it's resisting the temptation to stay indoors all day in front of the air conditioning. After all, you're living in Cambodia, so if you're going to spend your entire day inside, you might as well have stayed at home and saved yourself the plane ticket. So $50 a month can be done for all your utilities and internet, but only if you rarely use the air conditioning, and have most of the utilities included in your rent anyway. Which most are, I'll be honest. I mean, for example, I don't pay for my Wi-Fi, and my water bill is a fixed $5 a month. It's just the electricity you have to keep an eye on. Now on to what you have to give up. Now before you start packing your bags and calculating how many months of rent you can pay with loose change found on your couch, there's a few things you'll probably have to give up to make the $500 a month lifestyle even attempt to work. The biggest one is luxury. You're not going to be spending every weekend at rooftop bars, eating imported steaks, or booking spontaneous beach getaways. $500 budget is only about living simply and just about comfortably, and not pretending you're on a permanent vacation. You'll also have to be careful with imported products, because one of the fastest ways to destroy your budget is trying to recreate your life back home. Imported snacks, foreign groceries, specialty coffees, and Western restaurants all cost significantly more than the local alternatives. Because Cambodia can be incredibly affordable, but only if you're willing to embrace Cambodia. And if your shopping basket looks like it was assembled in Los Angeles, London, or Sydney, your wallet is going to suffer, that's for sure. And perhaps the biggest thing you'll have to give up is overall convenience. Sometimes the cheapest apartment isn't in the perfect location. Sometimes you'll take a tuk-tuk instead of owning a car or scooter. And sometimes you'll eat at the local noodle shop instead of ordering delivery. And none of these are major sacrifices, but they do add up. And the people who successfully live on $500 a month aren't necessarily richer or smarter, they've simply mastered the art of asking themselves, do I really need that? Before opening their wallet. So to stay under $500 a monthly limit, you'll genuinely need to live more like a long-term local resident than a tourist. So that means eating mostly local food, keeping nights out to a minimum, avoiding expensive imported products, and treating things like weekend trips, fancy restaurants, and daily cafe visits as an occasional once-in-a-blue-moon luxury, rather than everyday habits. The $500 lifestyle isn't for everyone, because it's not the lifestyle most would typically move across the world to start living. You only really enjoy it if your entire life is all about simplicity. I mean, you'll still be able to enjoy Cambodia in other ways, like meeting people, exploring the city mostly on foot, and having a very simple life. But you'll need to be conscious of where your money goes, because the moment you start living like you're on a permanent holiday, that $500 budget will disappear faster than a tuk-tuk after you say, I'll just walk. So who can actually live on just $500? Because the truth is not everyone can live on $500 comfortably here in Cambodia. So if you're someone who enjoys frequent nights out, imported groceries, weekend getaways, and the occasional online shopping spree, then you're going to struggle. The $500 budget works best for people who genuinely enjoy a simple lifestyle and don't need constant entertainment to stay happy. This budget is often most realistic for retirees, long-term travellers, digital nomads, all with very low expenses, and as well as minimalistic expats. These are the people who are happy eating local food, living in modest accommodation, and spending their free time exploring markets, cafes, and neighbourhoods, rather than luxury resorts. Plus, they're not trying to recreate their life back home, they're embracing life in Cambodia for what it is. And perhaps the most important requirement isn't your income, it's your mindset. Living on $500 a month requires a certain level of flexibility and realism. Because if you view every dollar as a way to maximise experiences, rather than accumulate possessions, Cambodia can feel incredibly affordable. But if your definition of a good life involves imported wine, air-conditioned shopping malls, and daily food deliveries, you'll discover that even Cambodia has a way of reminding you that budgets exist for a reason. And for anyone who says this budget is impossible, the locals here are living on even less than that a month sometimes. But I'll give you this, it is impossible for the lifestyle you're probably imagining when coming from the West. So you do have to live like a local to make this budget even slightly work. And finally, time for final thoughts. So, can you really live in Cambodia for $500 a month? The answer is yes, but probably not in the way most people imagine. What you can have is a simple apartment, affordable local food, basic transportation, and maybe enough left over to enjoy everyday life. Because in a world where $500 barely covers rent in some cities, this is actually pretty remarkable. But the real reason people choose Cambodia isn't because it's the absolute cheapest place on earth. It's because it offers a lifestyle that still feels attainable. For the right person, $500 can provide a comfortable, low-stress life in a country full of character, friendly people, and endless stories. But just remember, if your budget is $500 a month, your biggest financial strategy isn't investing, or budgeting apps, or even cryptocurrency. It's simply avoiding that daily habit of saying, it's only a few dollars. Because in Cambodia, a few dollars at a time is exactly how your $500 budget quietly disappears. And I know most people from the West wouldn't even bother moving if they had to try and make $500 a month last every month. Because the lifestyle they're used to, they won't even survive 1 month on this budget. But this video was just to give you an idea of what life you can live here for that kind of budget. But the next video in this series of videos I'm doing will actually be what you can get for $1,000 a month, which is a much more closer to lifestyle you're probably imagining. So make sure you're subscribed if you want to see that video, because that will definitely be more realistic for us Westerners. And that's it for today's video. If you enjoyed, make sure to leave a like, and as always, I'll see you guys in the next video.